Hey everybody, how y'all doing? This is going to be an interesting stream. I got to say, one of the more interesting side effects of my channel that I did not actually expect is that there would be people who would come out of the woodwork, both formerly from mainstream media and currently working in it. And one of the people I know who had found my channel and contacted me a while ago currently works at CNN and sent me this letter yesterday. And I thought it was interesting, first off, that CNN would send a letter about mandating a health decision and give you like 4 days to fulfill it. And that includes a weekend, by the way, because this was sent on a Friday. And then if you can't, then you can't come to work. So if you're a remote employee, basically CNN saying, this is for coming into the building, but they're starting to come back into the building starting June 1st. And I'm going to read you the letter and everything, but this essentially has left employees like, you can't come into the building to do your job. If you have to do your job in the building, which many people do, especially if you're, say, engineer, you're a producer, technical staff, a lot of those people are not the field reporters, for instance, who are not coming to the building that often. So those people are left with this choice. Now, what if they want the vaccine, but they haven't had the opportunity to get it? What if they can't get it? What if they have a medical issue? I mean, these are all things we're going to flush out in this live stream today. A couple special guests. I'm going to bring in our first one right now. Mark Fox, the one and only. I'm hoping you're going to become a regular attendee of live streams, a regular appear. I don't know what we would call you. A regular, I would call you an appearer, but I don't think that's English. A regular.
Yeah, that's a new word. Good morning.
TV English.
Yeah, no, what I am is a retired repentant propagandist that came from mainstream media. And fortunately, I got on time before it overtook me and robbed me of all my joy. So I'm more of a commentator, living in retirement, enjoying a semi-rural life in Alaska, watching from afar.
That was a great description. I may have to coin that one. You should probably copyright it in case maybe you can make some extra off of it. Okay, so Mark, I'm really excited to have you on the channel to talk about this because it's always good to get another person's perspective on, what do you think? What do you think about employers, generally speaking, mandating health decision? But what do you think specifically about newsrooms? Because I think one of my big questions that I want to get into today is, if you are a newsroom that has this policy, are you able to cover this issue, this debate fairly? Because you clearly are saying that this is something that needs to happen. And yet there is a very active debate right now about whether employers should be doing this. And so how do those two combine? So I'm just curious, before we read the letter, do you have any initial thoughts on that, on newsrooms, like CNN saying you have to get the vaccine, and then at the same time, there's this conversation that should be covered. I don't know if they're covering it regularly or at all, but I think it should be covered about whether people should have to do this or whether employers should be mandating this.
Well, I think there's vested interests that are very interested in promoting universal vaccination. I'm not saying that's malevolent, but I do think that by layering this corporate policy down on CNN staff, it's very high profile. So the message being, if you want to keep your job, you're going to get a vaccine, whether that's in media, newsrooms, or elsewhere.
MW says contributor. That's what we're going to call you. Contributor.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect.
I don't know if this is it, stockholders, but you're not a stockholder, Mike. I don't. I think that may have been
a stakeholder. Yeah, that's the great part, is no one can fire me. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's read the letter, shall we? I'm going to, here we go. Ask if there are any precedents historically, say the Spanish flu and the like. We'll get into that in a second. We should be having ask CNN to read the vax insert first. Oh, wait, it's blank. Okay, I don't know if it's true. um, we do have Robert Barnes, hopefully, joining us in a little bit to talk about the legal side of all of this. I will say initially what I've been reading and watching, it seems like the one big question hanging here is whether the emergency authorization versus an approval, a vaccine that's gone through the full approval process, will make a difference. So if an employer can enforce this for something that has not been through the entirety of the approval process. But, generally speaking, I think, I don't know, what would you do, Mark? I guess I'm just curious, how would you be thinking through this if you were an employee right now?
Well, all employers work from the premise of liability prevention. So within human resources and legal, they're going to be looking to make sure that they do not violate government regs, at the same time don't expose themselves to liability. Now, fortunately for Big Pharma, or unfortunately for us, the liability for these vaccines is non-existent, meaning, if something goes wrong, nobody can really litigate it, file a lawsuit, etc. There's a vaccine compensation board, but that is a very long, drawn-out process, and it doesn't do you much good if you're, gravely injured or dead. So I think as employers look at this, they're going to want to, they don't want to offend their employees. Unless they're a very large employer with a very high profile, they're going to want to try and do minimal compliance. I think it's interesting when, you brought to my attention the CNN letter or memo. I was thinking, well, geez, this certainly must finally break through to the employees at CNN that, maybe it's time to really debate this on the air, to talk about it. But we'll see.
Yeah, I almost think it sends the message the other way, that you are not going to bring this up. Jeff Zucker, we already know he is regularly attending these editorial meetings in the morning. So can you imagine when you and I were in the news business, I didn't have the general manager phoning into our editorial meetings in the morning. That was not
Right.
something that happened. So I think it's interesting. He's very involved. So he sends this letter that's like, you better get the vaccine or you can't come to the building. Are you the reporter that's like, oh, hey, I think we should debate this on air, and let's do it on Brian Stelter's show, the guy who asks for the vaccine selfies,
Yeah, no, it's interesting how, I mean, then again, you and I are a bit cut from a different cloth than many of our former associates. We ask hard questions, we employ critical thinking, and that's not really encouraged these days in media. It's simply take a position and push a point of view. I think that this is going to backfire. I could be wrong, and I would be disappointed if it didn't backfire. I would like to see, finally, mainstream national media grow a spine, but again, up in the air.
The positive of where we're at right now in the news and technology world is that you and I can talk about this right now. I mean, I'm not sure how long YouTube leaves it up, but again, quick plug for my other platforms, links in the description. So definitely check those out. I'll make sure this video ends up on them regardless of what happens, because StreamYard is currently recording it. But we may be the first people talking about this. Maybe we're going to be the only people talking about this. I don't know. Or maybe this is us breaking this news and other outlets will pick it up. Who knows? I'm grateful at least that we have the opportunity and that there are people who are interested in hearing what those of us on the outside are saying. And I don't know. I mean, maybe CNN sees this and they're like, well, we can't avoid it anymore. So I guess we're going to have to talk about it, because Allison and Mark, those two, they talked about it.
Well, there goes our career future in mainstream media, right? So, oh, wait, we don't care. So, yeah. No, I think this is going to be picked up. I mean, releasing the memo on a Friday is standard operating procedure. The news cycle is such that releasing it on a Friday afternoon allows the storm to die down, and managers to get a handle around their people on it. So I'm thinking that Sunday, and there's a holiday weekend, of course, giving even more time for things to be ignored. But I think that, and I'm going to see to it as best I can, that this particular memo, which is of critical importance to, it doesn't matter which industry you work in, is going to get the attention that it needs. And I can't imagine that folks that are independent journalists of the ilk, as you are, will ignore it. I think it's a absolutely prime subject for discussion, because everybody works somewhere. And and I obviously, I try to leave out opinions when I comment on things, but my personal belief is that, hey, my body, my choice.
I think that where I fall on this is just, I have a real issue. I know it's not unprecedented, so I know I don't want to say, oh, this is new, though. I do think, I don't know, there are certain points you could make about the nuances of this particular issue compared to years past. But my concern is the precedent, I guess, it continues to set, especially say for, when you're forced, basically that's what this is, right? I mean, you are being forced. Absolutely. I know it's allegedly a choice, but let's get real here. You have 3 days to make a decision over a weekend. What are you going to do? Take your vacation time? What if you don't have your vacation time? What if what if you can't get it? It feels like it sets a precedent for these newsrooms doing even worse things than or corporations doing worse things than they have in the past. Because, it's not like they make great decisions all the time. So it's not like that, in order to try to control or manipulate their employees, that my contract was full of opportunities for them to do that kind of thing, and stuff that didn't necessarily have to do with health, but you have to wear this, you have to look like this, you have to do all these things. I mean, down thousands, all kinds of things. But I have an issue when it's a choice that could affect my long-term health that is currently being debated in the public sphere, not just from a health perspective, but from the issue, again, like we're talking about. I think it's a fair point to debate if you're mandating something that you're covering. I don't know. Somebody give me a reason to believe that doesn't make you biased. It's difficult for me to put two and two together, how you have an organization that's giving this debate a fair shake when it's also mandating this for its employees. And it looks like we have Robert Barnes here as well. So slow clap.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me read this letter real fast so that we can get to it. And I hope this works. June is nearly upon us, signaling that we are almost halfway through what has been an incredibly productive and busy year. And again, this sent May 27th. Like many of you, I am eager to enjoy a long holiday weekend and a further return to the normalcy of celebrating with family and friends. And as you have heard me say, I'm also eager for us to be together again in the office. Getting back into the workplace is exciting for many, but has also raised a lot of questions. Many of you joined Sanjay and me earlier this week to talk about those questions in our broadcast town hall. If your schedule or time zone did not allow you to watch live, we will be hosting another on Wednesday, June 9th at 8 a.m. Eastern time. More to come on that. But now let's talk about June 1st. Let's see if this will work. Okay, I have to go back to the next one. Hang on. Here we go. Okay. Next Tuesday, we are starting the process of a completely voluntary soft return to our workplaces for anyone who is fully vaccinated. And in accordance with CDC guidelines, masks will not be required. To be clear, this means that you do not have to wear one, but anyone who prefers to wear a mask may absolutely do so if it makes you more comfortable. We are all feeling our way through reentry, so if you're ready to come back and you're vaccinated, I urge you to give it a shot, no pun intended. And of course, if you have not been vaccinated yet and are able to be, I encourage you to do so. For those of you who are planning to come in starting next Tuesday or in the days that follow, you no longer need permission to come in. We do ask you to please be in touch with your manager and let them know, just so we can have a general sense of numbers. And to those of you who have been coming in regularly for the past number of months, there is no need to have that conversation, but know that beginning June 1st, you will need to be fully vaccinated to come into the workplace, regardless of if you have already been coming in. This vaccination requirement is on the honor system. I trust each of you to be honest, and in the same way, I ask each of you to trust your fellow colleagues. Now, real fast before I go on, if say you're somebody who's been coming into the newsroom and you're not vaccinated, and it's like on the honor system, but Okay, so you're basically having to out yourself. Am I wrong here? Because you would be right, because you can't come in now. It would be an obvious sign that you didn't get vaccinated. So that's a weird thing. So we'll talk about that. Hang on. But I just wanted to flag that. I also want to mention this soft return applies specifically to our CNN locations in the US, including Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and Washington, D.C. For those of you in other cities, please check with your manager or HR partner to ensure that your building will be open for business. While we are following local and state-by-state guidance, there may be some smaller bureaus or offices that are not equipped to welcome you back just yet. Okay, well, that's a good point. It's U.S. locations. Okay. We will know. Hang on, let me make sure that I can see this. Okay, something about Monday. We will. Did I get this right? Hang on. I'm doing this for my local, so I'm just making sure Yes. Okay. Other things to note about next week, some of our COVID policies are expiring effective Monday, including we will no longer be subsidizing transportation expenses beyond what was already being done pre-COVID for those with late night and overnight shifts. Our conference rooms, work cafes, and common spaces that have been closed are once again open and available for your use. Please follow the same protocols in terms of reserving those spaces that you did pre-COVID. A couple other things to keep in mind in our new normal. The pass card system will be in place in all of our buildings and required for entry. For more information about how to use it, click here. Beginning June 1st, we will be welcoming guests back to our studios for on-air appearances. However, any guest coming in will be required to be fully vaccinated. So I also think that's another interesting point. And they say bookers will need to confirm over the phone that guests are vaccinated, and they will be required to show a vaccination card upon arrival at CNN. For more information about how this will work, please reach out to your show's business admin. Okay. While we be allowing guests for on-air appearances, we will not be allowing guests into the building for any other reason, at least until our official opening in the fall. So, Mark, you will not be able to take that tour of CNN that you were really hoping to share.
Heartbreaking.
Food in our work cafes free of charge, and that will continue, so you can get free food. Many of you have asked. Okay, I think that's a typo. Many of you have asked about the gyms. Gym facilities will be reopening in August in Atlanta and September in Hudson Yards. We have long had the highest caliber filtration systems in our facilities. We increased the filter change-out schedule of those systems during the pandemic year, and we will maintain that upgraded schedule going forward. We will continue our increased cleaning protocols, which were implemented at the start of COVID in our common workspaces, such as control rooms, studios, and edit rooms. We will also continue to provide cleaning supplies for anyone who needs them. If you have any questions regarding the vaccine requirement or any part of our soft return, please reach out to your manager or HR. I'm sure they work for you. Please direct any no, he didn't say that, but I said that. Please direct any accommodation request related to the vaccine requirement to HR. Okay, so I guess, yeah, so we're talking accommodations. What does that mean? As I reflect on the last 15 months, I'm so grateful that we're going to this Memorial Day weekend with the certainty that we will very soon be together again, Jeff. Okay, guys, so what do you think?
Doc, you're up. Let's hear from you.
Go ahead, sorry.
I mean, my take is that he's trying to dodge or get around certain potential issues, legal issues. Like the whole thing is designed that way. So, for example, in other words, he's writing it like it's a casual letter, so that it's not quite an employer requirement, but can be interpreted that way. So, it's meant. This was a carefully reviewed counsel email. This is not, hey, how are things going, everybody? And by the way, these things are kind of required, not really required because it's all in the honor system. And you have accommodations, but we kind of expect it to be the case, right? Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of routine. So he's and the way they're trying to dodge the legal issues is they're not requiring anyone that's an employee to produce any proof that they've actually been vaccinated. They're not even going to inquire of them whether they've been vaccinated. So, and what they're doing is they're avoid, like, people get HIPAA and ADA confused. HIPAA is about making sure your employer doesn't distribute your health information to other people. ADA is about preventing what information your employer can get. So your employer, for example, can only do medical exams under certain limited circumstances, can only request medical information under certain circumstances. The easiest way to explain this to people when people seem baffled by it, say, of course they can ask whether you're vaccinated. Like, okay, I guess they can, well, I'll steal from Allison. I guess they can also ask, which STDs you've had, who have you recently had relationships with, so on and so forth. No, they can't. But it's the ADA that prohibits that. The Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA is much broader than the popular perception that it only applies to people with disabilities. It applies to medical examinations. It applies to health information. It applies to perceived disabilities. That's why the whole key to that letter, keeping it legal, is at the end. When he says, oh, if you need an accommodation, and notice he doesn't limit the accommodation, which is smart. That's a lawyer who drafted that. Not just religious, not just medical. That's a lawyer who said, put it this way. Oh, if you need any accommodations at all, then, hey, just let your HR people know, because your HR people will have a nice little lawyer drafted list of how they should handle it. So it's one of those deals that you probably, if you're a CNN employee, you can probably easily get an accommodation, number one. Number two, just never tell anybody. And yeah, it's on the honor system, but not really. It's not part of your contract. So you can just go into work and nobody's asking you. And so don't ask, don't tell. We're back to 1991 military.
Mark, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
Oh, not at all. I think many of the points that you just addressed there were spot on. My sense, that was my first hearing of the actual memo. And absolutely, this came out of legal CYA, carefully crafted opt-out honor system stuff. Well, I'll tell you, if you're going to ask me to go on the honor system, you're basically asking me to lie to you. And don't ask, don't tell kind of approach is exactly what they're doing. I'm not, if I was still in the game, I would just smile and go to work, not say a word. And that's the best approach for, at least if anyone from CNN is listening, just smile and don't say a word, go about your job. Because if you make a point of it, or you force them to make a point of it with you, then things could get sticky. But yeah, I don't have much more to add to that analysis. It was really good.
Are you saying that CNN would approve of lying, Mark?
I'm saying that dishonesty within media is a moving target, and that I think that there's lying to the public and then there's lying to themselves. So my gut instinct, I think the stats and the surveys are kind of playing this out nationwide. A solid third of the American population doesn't want anything to do with this vaccine. And that's completely understandable in light of the potential medical complications. I am not planning on getting it. Because I had a relative about 7 years ago who got a flu shot and was dead in a week because of something called Guillain-Barré. And that was with an approved and clinically trialed vaccine. So because there's so much, emergency use authorization, no clarity, and certainly no clinical trials of a proper nature, hey, I'm out. So yeah, I think in newsrooms, you're going to have that same third of the population feeling, I don't want to participate in this, but I don't have the freedom to not work. So yeah, to answer your question, Allison, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to lie by design.
I was hearing that managers were caught off guard by this because they have to figure out the schedules now if people can't come in, and remains to be seen what that's going to look like. But I did hear from my source that there is a little bit of concern that there may be issues, which then goes to show that there may be more variety and diversity of thought behind the scene at some of these places than is allowed for on screen. I
think so. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that what's going to happen is with the majority of people, if they have had, there are people with health conditions which legitimately should allow them to opt out. I don't think I should have to lie to my employer. I should be able to say, hey, because of this medical condition, I'm opting out. That's the only way with integrity. The don't ask, don't tell analogy. How well did that work out for us in the military? Not very well. So at the end of the day, we're creating a two-tier society. And geez, why should I even have to reveal my thoughts on the subject to an employer? And if I do, what are the consequences? Now, if we lived in a society where not having a job was an option, Great. Who cares? I'd quit CNN and I'd go to work doing whatever. But what they're offering, what they're basically saying is that your nice corporate job's in jeopardy if we find out you're not playing by our unenforceable rules. And so it's a very vague thing, you know.
I don't see how that aligns with fairly covering this issue. I don't see how how journalists in a newsroom being told this feel comfortable speaking up and asking for a fair debate. I can tell you this, if I were faced with this decision, and I'm glad I got out of the news business fortuitously 4 months before this became an issue, not knowing this was going to be something, I think this would be the end for me, regardless of my thoughts on this particular vaccine, because I just don't like the idea of an employer telling me what I have to do with my health. I just don't like it. I don't even know if I can necessarily verbalize exactly what it is, other than maybe I'm just an obstinate, you know what, but I just don't, I don't trust my old bosses to know what they're talking about well enough to tell me what I should be doing with my health. I just don't trust anything about what they used to know, having had these conversations with them in the past. Robert, to go back to the legal side of this, one thing we talked about before you got on here is, again, is if there's a difference between with an authorization versus an approval when it comes to your legal ability to mandate it. Is that going to become something that comes into play with all of this here?
It could. I mean, what they've done here is they've circumvented that for the most part by saying you can get an accommodation. They probably, not entirely. Somebody could sue saying, look, this statement in here says I have to be vaccinated to work. But my guess is that CNN will say, no, you don't have to be vaccinated to work. You can get an accommodation. You can work from home if for whatever reason you object, so on and so forth. So and we're not actually compelling a medical exam. We're not compelling medical records to be disclosed. So this would be the hardest suit to bring because of how carefully they've carved out all these loopholes, which, by the way, are an implicit acknowledgement that they're not on that strong of a legal ground here, because I'm sure CNN's legal analyst will be on CNN saying every employer can absolutely mandate without exception you take the vaccine, but CNN itself is unwilling to do so. CNN is doing it in a backhanded way so they can claim they're doing so, but it's one of those things, the loopholes swallow up the rule. And so I think that because otherwise you could bring suit. I mean, it's the people in high-ranking positions of government and economic life have reached out to me. So I think a lot of people would be surprised where the opposition comes from, but they shouldn't be, because this is the first time in history we've ever done this. We've never had employers mandate you take a certain medical treatment ever before. Imagine if this would have happened during the peak of the HIV panic and the AIDS panic, before they even knew it was HIV. Would everybody in the media have the same reaction to say, oh, okay, by the way, you need to get tested for AIDS, you need to tell us, or what will be an honor system, you can't come into the office until we know otherwise? I think a lot of people would have been offended by that, and justifiably so. It's just the fear factor has, my view from the get-go was they're trying to do this to condition people to make this the new normal, that they can mandate anything in your body anytime they want.
So I was very young during that, so I don't remember, but from what I read and hear, it seems like we did in some ways push that under the rug, and like it was kind of a don't ask, don't tell. We weren't supposed to talk about it, and now we actually look back on the way some of that was handled as being wrong. Like we were unfairly closing pools and not wanting people around us and not hugging and all, you know what I mean? All of these things, and now we look back and we're like, God, can you believe we did that? Which it kind of makes me wonder if that's how we will maybe look at this someday, 40 or 50 years from now. Like, can you believe we did that with people who wouldn't? I don't know, because I think now we look at the AIDS epidemic, we look at that situation and the way that we handled it and talked about it and because we did do some of that stuff, but we look at that now as inhumane. But I don't know if back then it was looked at that way, right? I mean, there were a lot of people who thought that was a fine way to handle the whole epidemic.
Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, guy.
I mean, Fauci thought you might be able to get it from your kitchen. But the most famous example of this was Magic Johnson. He came back and played in the NBA for a while, and you had a bunch of players paranoid. And now all of those players look like idiots. and to some degree bigots, but definitely idiots. And I think if we go a reasonable path, people will look back at this and say this was idiotic and insane. But that story may never get told. The story that may get told is the story that CNN's already telling. But there's no question. How can you fairly cover this story when you are yourself demanding people take it, which presumes and presupposes both its safetiness and efficacy and the danger level and threat level of COVID, all of which are in question and in controversy and contested? And how can you tell people that it's easy to mandate, which some of their legal analysts already have, when they themselves are carving out 100 loopholes before they'll mandate it?
That's interesting.
But interestingly, I actually happened to be working in newsrooms in the 80s, early 80s, in San Francisco, and became very aware of the fear that arose from the AIDS epidemic. And obviously, just like this scenario, we didn't know what the virus was about, how you could catch it, how it would transmit. Even in the newsrooms itself, we had a number of members of the staff that were in the gay community, which is where it was predominant at the time. And there was a lot of fear. And so there were employers talking at that time about asking us voluntarily to get an HIV test. And honestly, none of us wanted to know. It was a little scary. So we tiptoed around it ever so delicately. Now what we understand about HIV and AIDS is light years ahead of what we did then. And I know that we all felt like idiots in the newsroom too 10 years later. We didn't think that we were being bigoted. We were driven by fear. And so I think that's very much what's going on now too.
Yeah, we forget sometimes, I think, that journalists are the victims of their own propaganda sometimes, and so they're consuming the diet just like the public. So to assume that they're somehow, separating themselves or something from it, like they have a filter, a brain filter, even if you're not the one who's actually on camera talking about it, but it's constantly in the ethos of the newsroom, then, to act like you're not affected by that, I think is naive. Okay, real fast. Darnell asks, if someone gets sick and contact tracers go to CNN, might they reveal vaccination status despite ADA? Might unmasked, unvaccinated be outed? I mean, I don't know. Well, I think that there's a lot of ways you could be outed in this particular case that don't even require that.
Yeah, and I don't know how they would know what the person was sick of or anything else, because that's protected medical information that they have limited access to, and they can't share and distribute it. That's where HIPAA applies. HIPAA precludes them from sharing medical information they know about an employee. The ADA limits what medical information they can get in the first place.
Okay. So, I guess big picture, when we're looking at all this happening right now, what do you guys think? If say this happens, okay, and because this is not just CNN, obviously this is happening at other businesses. And Mark, you sent me a video from CNBC talking about a waitress at a restaurant in New York City, and she was wanting to get pregnant, and she was concerned about getting the vaccine, and she's just like, I'm just looking into it, and I just am not ready to make the decision yet, and so she loses her job. It's a really tough spot to be in. I guess, and Robert, listening to what you're saying, it sounds like it's a very tough from a legal standpoint. And who has the money to hire a lawyer to push back on this? I mean, not everybody or most people even have the finances. So is there a best case scenario? Like, any advice, I guess, if people are in this situation? I just don't even know how to help people who are trying to think through this to at least, I don't know, buy them some time. Maybe we do what Mark said, just take the CNN route and smile and spin it. that's what they do.
I mean, for many of them, they can't compel you to tell them. And so that can be a source of protection. A second level, if it accelerates to the point where it's both mandated and you're required to disclose or you're going to get fired, then, sometimes a letter works, that a letter that reminds them that This is that you'll bring legal action. This is not legally appropriate. This is discrimination under the ADA. This is an emergency use authorized vaccine that cannot be mandated under that set of rules. That the Nuremberg Code prohibits medical experimentation without informed consent. And while this is and during the time, well, as long as it's an emergency use vaccine, it is considered an experimental vaccine by definition legally. And last but not least, it's an invasion of privacy under various state tort law. Now, what I found, at least initially, depending on the size of the employer, is while some federal agencies have gone back and forth, it's pretty clear to me. They admitted it out of the gate that an employer can be held responsible for if they mandate the vaccine and an employee suffers a consequence. That's considered a work injury. And I get that because I and other people were quoting this, some government sources tried to retract that language. That doesn't matter. That's just the law. They can't change the law by admitting it or not admitting it. And a lot of employers second guess it at that point. It becomes real informative because you discover that none of these employers have done any risk cost benefit analysis themselves. So, and they're like, hold on a second. If there is something wrong with this thing, they can't sue the drug company. They can only sue me, but they can sue me. And in the 1976 swine flu example, and I always recommend people give them the site to the CBS 60 Minutes special about the 1976 swine flu. That ended up being millions and millions and millions of damages. And so does an employer really want to take that gamble? And often they suddenly decide that for you, they'll make an accommodation. So there's ways to fight back. I am going to be bringing suits. Bobby Kennedy's Children's Health Defense is going to be bringing suits. There's already some suits pending. So more suits will come out there. Yeah, see what OSHA is saying? OSHA can't say that. OSHA doesn't have the authority to say that. OSHA initially admitted that an employer would be held liable because here's the law. Did you suffer an injury related to work? That makes it work compensation, or if work compensation doesn't cover a private tort. That's the law. Most of that law is state law. It's not even federal law. So what OSHA admitted out of the gate is that the immunity law doesn't apply to employer mandates. The emergency use authorization provisions and the Nuremberg Code, both enforceable in U.S. law, do not allow them to exempt employers from liability for this. So, but what happened is I and other people were quoting OSHA, which admitted this out of the gate. And then OSHA went back and said, we're going to pretend we didn't admit the law is what it is. But it shows you how corrupt some of our government agencies are.
Yeah, well, so Jason here says Washington State is requiring us employers to confirm employee vax. So that's another.
And that's why it's coming out of the gate right away. I mean, that's the problem, is that in states can be sued related to this. They're all assuming the Nuremberg Code won't apply, the emergency use authorization law will be unenforced, that the ADA won't apply to this context. It's mostly because nobody's ever tried this before. No employer has mandated a vaccine before. And they're pretending that because it has the magic word vaccine on it, all this is a drug. That's what we should call it. A drug which purportedly has certain benefits. But that's what it is. They recast it as vaccines because in the public mind, vaccines cure kids from terrible diseases. So they're like, okay, we're not going to call it a drug. We're going to call it a vaccine. And thereby, all of a sudden, in the public discourse, it magically has legal immunity and legal protection. It's like, God dropped it. So the way your mom tells you you became a baby. A stork dropped you on the door. So it's the same kind of mindset. But that's not what the law is on the books, and nor what it ever has been. Now, the big X factor is, will courts care? Because going back to your point about how can you be a fair journalist if you yourself are enforcing these policies, walk into any court in America. Like during the mask mandates, I was trying to tell people, yes, I can challenge the mask mandates, but I will be going into a court that has its own mask mandate. So what do you think? Do you think the court's going to be impartial about mask mandates when it's mandating that I wear a mask to even make the argument? So that's the hurdle, is the politics with the courts, not the law.
Mark, anything to add?
It sounds to me, when we began this session, I was convinced that there was no hope. And after listening to what you shared with us about the legal processes and laws, I actually have some encouragement, because it may be lawyers at the end of the day that save us from this nonsense. And I applaud that. That's my thought.
Robert, actually, I got a hold of the guy in this case. I don't know if you've heard of this. We were just talking about this on the radio show that I got to guest host yesterday in the Seattle area. This Supreme Court ruling that YouTube is not, or that if you have a YouTube channel, you're not legally a news media outlet. And then essentially they're saying you got to have an LLC. You got to be registered with the state in order to be considered news, in order to then qualify for these public records requests that this guy wanted. I talked to him on the phone yesterday. He's going to come on the channel. And I was going to try to see if you would be willing to do the live stream with us, because one of the things he was saying was, in his opinion, he feels like judges are the ones in large part who don't like public records requests being filled. And so they're often leaning on the side of not releasing this information for one reason or another. And so once again, like you were bringing up, what happens in court with all this if you have a judicial system that is encouraged, it almost feels like nowadays, with the public to turn into, I don't know, moral monarchs of sorts. They've just decided that, like, it's not necessarily just law they're interpreting, but they're becoming all kinds of policemen in other ways. And he, his thought is just like, this is an issue that is not talked about often, but that you want public records, you think you're a citizen, it's available to you, but rarely you're going to get a judge to fall on the side of, Jim, wherever, should be able to find out the information that, my old TV station should be able to find out, that they're actually very averse to that. They're very, very anti, I guess, or at least they're going to lean on the side of narrowing what that window is for who is considered a journalist, in order to narrow the window of who is allowed to get this kind of information in a public records request.
Yeah, I mean, it's it must be specific to Washington state law. That I'd be curious about that, because they've tried to also make this argument in the anti-SLAPP context. Tried to argue that only institutional media are supposed to get the protection under the anti-SLAPP laws that prohibit media people from being for anybody talking about a matter of public information being targeted for lawfare. So I'm curious about this.
Yeah, it says it's specific to certain records relating to public employment that are exempt from public request. The story that he tells is really crazy, because he said that he filed this because of the way he was treated. He was arrested in court for taking video for obstructing, and then his story of what happened to him in jail is why he wanted to get the names of the people who handled him in jail. And I mean, I was just blown away. Anyway, we'll have him on, and then you can, hear what he has to say about it all. But, the reason I bring this up is just simply because no matter what it is that we're deciding, the courts are just going to make the decision for us, which we often do. I mean, that's why everybody gets so freaked out every time we get a new president. What are they going to do with the courts? Because they've just sort of become our politicians at this point. And so you have this judicial system now determining whether people are allowed to say that their employees have to get this vaccine. And, this is how it's going to happen, unless you're in Mark's state, right? Mark, you said Alaska has policy about this.
Well, it's pending legislation, but there's been an executive order deployed to prohibit employers, except for the federal government, to require vaccination or proof of it. And that is kind of an executive order which has limited lifespan here in Alaska. So we're looking forward to the legislation passing. But yes, we do. And some other states as well have begun that process. Well, is there anything anybody else would like to add? I'm not quite sure. I have a ton of other questions, just that, I think, and I didn't really even, it's not like I'm doing this because I have plenty of people that follow this channel who got the vaccine. I'm not trying to necessarily push people one way or the other. I just feel like this conversation is not often allowed on the, or it's just not given, I think, the fair shake it should be, even if it is put up every once in a while by my former industry, by Mark's former industry. And so I just want to talk about it, because I think there are a lot of people with questions,
even if they got the shot, that are just questions about the precedent this sets, questions about whether employers, because we just keep moving the line, the goalposts, so that we wake up again like post 9/11, where just like things now we just accept as the way they are, and then many people may be born after that, or even born before it, like just don't even remember that there was a time when things were different. And so just trying to keep the conversation alive and give people some answers that they're not often allowed to see. And again, like my big question with all of this just is, I always say that it's impossible to just have journalists who live in a vacuum. Of course, people have their positions, but as it goes with any newsroom training, and there are a lot of them in these corporations now on a bunch of different topics, I just think it creates an atmosphere where or it's not just the atmosphere of concern, fear, intimidation to question these things, but Mark, then maybe it gets us to like the whole idea that this is exactly why you would still be in one of these newsrooms at this point, because people, I do know, I will say this, I have a lot of empathy for folks who are in the newsroom trying to do a good job, and then bills, medical care, all that stuff is a real thing. So I would never say like I was there, right? I mean, I was there trying to figure my path out. At the same time, though, it makes it, I think, even more and more obvious how if you're standing by thinking that all of this is just normal and okay, like this is just the way that journalism should work, that probably reflects a little bit more on your personality as well, that, not just the newsroom. So to take a little paragraph out of manufacturing consent.
There you go. Exactly. I think we're going to see a time when there will be blowback from things like this. I think it's not here yet. I think the fear, for example, after 9/11, it took a long time for anybody to question anything, maybe 2, 3, or 4 years. And I think this similar process is going to unfold over time with this entire mandating or attempted mandating of vaccinations. So I think I'm optimistic, and certainly anyone who's gotten the vaccine, my in-laws who are in their 80s got it, and good on them. That's great, fantastic. If they're comfortable with their decision for their body, I'm totally comfortable with that too. But no one should. I don't really trust big pharma, but I do trust the critical thinking skills of most Americans, not all of them. And I think as the generations go on, we progressively are eliminating critical thinking from the youth, and then eventually we'll get to a point where there's this uniformity of thought and a permissible range of thought. I guess I'm just a really dinosaur, because I remember freedom and I really enjoyed it, and I miss it, and I'm hoping it'll come back in style soon.
Robert, do you have any thoughts on this? They are predicting that under 12 vaccines will be available by the end of the summer. So what happens when you as school districts start mandating this? Is that something that, it's just going to depend state by state whether you'll get an exemption? Could they change the exemptions for this shot versus the other ones? Like you can claim religious reasons for MMR, but you can't for this. Is it possible to discriminate, I guess, one vaccine versus another?
Yeah, I mean, schools are a whole different animal. It will depend on when it's no longer emergency use authorization. And so I don't see FDA approving for a while. If they try an emergency use authorization for kids, that's a different legal animal, because what was approved by the U.S. Supreme Court were FDA approved vaccines that fit a certain standard that this one does not yet fit, given the low risk to kids and that this is particularly young children. And Bobby Kennedy's on top of that, so that there'll be suits filed right away as soon as, because what he's only limited by is who he can represent, because it's only people that are kids. So he can't do suits that are outside of that. But any suit involving a kid, he'll be there in a heartbeat.
I think this is interesting. I got the vax to get businesses and the economy going. I just hate to see it drawn out, but personal rights are definitely a valid topic. And when I was talking to my dad, again, I brought him up on the channel in the past. He's been on the channel, orthopedic surgeon, but was assigned to the vaccine clinic at the VA where he works. And he always starts out by asking, do you have any questions or concerns that, and he said, typically the response is, I just want to get back to doing this, I just want my life to go back to normal. And then he'll ask, well, how does this help your life go back to normal? Well, I want to be able to travel, or I want to be able to go out to eat or whatever. And he rarely, if at all, hears people say, I'm just nervous I'm going to die of COVID. And so I'm getting the vaccine, you know, and it's often these connections with personal liberties. And so I just go back to that because, you know, I'm not saying that that's like necessarily, that's obviously an anecdotal deal. And, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of people who have got it for health reasons, but I guess from the devil's advocate perspective on that one, it just concerns me people feeling like with Dr. Lena Wen, who was on CNN saying we got to get people vaccinated before we open up. Otherwise, what's the incentive? Has always been kind of a red flag for me that we are making it hard for people to continue with their lives in order to push them and manipulate them to make health decisions instead of, it being a thing that people make for a medical reason. Like, to me, if you get it for the medical reason, you feel free and not coerced to do that. Fine. It just I guess it concerns me as somebody who's wary, I guess, of whether it's the employer or the government or whoever else. And that is, I guess, another final question. If you work for the government, is this different? So if you work for a private employer versus a government employer, is it going to be different? And especially if you work for a federal government versus a state government, how does all that shake out?
Well, it's definitely rising up. But in 2003, the Ashcroft, when he was secretary under Bush, tried to at the Justice Department, actually, and Rumsfeld, when he was Rumsfeld was the guy sued under Secretary of Defense under Bush. He tried to mandate an emergency use authorized vaccine for purposes of combat zones where they were concerned about certain things. Soldiers sued, and the soldiers won. The court said, no, this is an emergency use authorized vaccine. You can't mandate it, even for the military, even under unique circumstances. So if you can't, like the military, soldiers have the least protection of anybody in the entire, frankly, civil society when it comes to their rights. I have a problem with that, but that's another story. But, because courts are never going to usually challenge or contest the military hierarchy, whether that's a FOIA request or anything else, but definitely employment and conditions of service, et cetera. But so if they won, then anybody can win. As long as this is an emergency use authorized vaccine, then people can win, no doubt. Once it becomes an FDA vaccine, approved regular vaccine, then it's going to be more difficult. Still not impossible, though, by any stretch. Because, again, my view is this is, as you guys have been talking about, this isn't about whether you should or should not take the vaccine. This is about who should have the right to decide whether or not you take the vaccine. Should it be you or somebody else? So this is about informed consent and choice, and the choice not being in the hands of the powerful, but in the hands of every ordinary person.
Mark, anything else before we go? Robert?
No, it sounds like I appreciate it. No, I think we should work very diligently to send these authorization processes off the rails as best we can. Talk about sabotaging, victory through sabotage. I would like to keep it in the status it's currently at and extend these protections, which you were describing. So yeah, no, my final thought is, wow, we're really in an interesting dystopian world, aren't we? Where employers are deciding what happens to our bodies. And the whole concept scares me. And I'm just glad that I'm not employed. It's a real positive.
Robert, anything else?
No, but I mean, where does it stop? If they have this right, where else do they go? So this is a real live Milgram experiment. They're not going to stop here. This won't be the last time, and this won't be the scope of it. Whenever the government gets more power, the state gets more power, your employer gets more power, they exercise it and keep going. They don't pull it back. So that's why we have to fight now. So, never forgive, never forget, hold the line.
What about the flu vaccine at a nursing home? You work at a nursing home and you get the flu vaccine. Is that an example of something like this?
It's frequently given, but to my knowledge, the flu vaccine since the debacle of 1976 has not been mandated anywhere.
I know people that have to get flu vaccines every year for work. Yeah. That's what they're told anyway.
That may be what they're told. I'd be curious. That's almost never put in the law. So someone might, I'd be curious to see that.
Okay.
Because to my knowledge, that's never been legally compelled.
So you're
maybe
saying,
they-
I mean, they may be told that by their employer, but if they were to push back, they might have legal
Right.
case there. You're saying?
Oh yeah, no doubt whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think my final thought is just that, again, you know, it's one thing if it's a restaurant that's determining this for its employees. It may be same in practice as CNN, but CNN is also the one giving you information about this stuff, not the restaurant. And so I'm more concerned about a CNN making these decisions for its employees because it's also telling the restaurants of the world what the information is regarding this topic. And so it just, to me, it goes to show how they're thinking through this. And so if you're a news consumer, it's worthy to just take a second and reflect on the biases that are brought to the studios, the newsrooms, that are informing what you're reading and what you're seeing. And so I'm sure that the vast majority of my audience already is very skeptical of that stuff, but it just seems to me that it's a conflict of interest in a lot of ways. You know, maybe not necessarily a financial one. Perhaps there is, I don't know, some kind of connection there, but it seems like it would be very difficult to say that you are giving this topic the fairness and accuracy that it deserves when you are mandating a policy like this. That's my big question. And so thereby you're now informing the restaurants, you know, the flower shops, whatever else about their policies, and informing the way that they think through it when you clearly have this bias yourself. It just makes me question your ability to cover it. So that's all I got. All right. Well, thank you both for participating in this kind of last minute deal. And everybody, don't forget that there are links in the description for our other platforms. As you can see, Robert has vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which you haven't plugged one time. So I feel like you should just say it at least once, Robert.
Sure. vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Okay. And Mark lives in Alaska where you can't reach him at all. Obviously, you see his mode of transportation hanging behind his head. He snowshoes everywhere, even in the summer. Anyway, okay. Well, you guys, everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.